we are hitting our limit in terms of what can be publicly scraped to create these models. And because of that, there's a lot of talk around where crypto could come into play to incentivize the collection of different data sources.
More funding does not necessarily make it for you easier to find product market fit. But there's a big caveat here, which is many things in AI are closer to hardware than they are to software.
Hey everyone, we all know blockchain is changing the world, but who's actually driving it? I'm excited to invite you to the 6th edition of Meridian, a Web3 conference hosted by the Stellar Development Foundation in London from October 15th through 17th. Get early bird tickets at meridian.stellar.org with code BLOCKWORKSPOD. Special thanks to Stellar for sponsoring us. Now, let's get into today's episode. Hey everyone, the Polygon Community Grants Program was launched with 1 billion tokens, all for Polygon builders. Really excited to share that on today's episode of Empire. Season 1 of the Polygon Community Grants Program is now live. It features 35 million in Matic to support the next generation of Polygon projects. Join the aggregated future today by applying at polygon.technology/grants. Big thanks to Polygon for sponsoring Empire. What's up, everyone? Before we jump into today's episode, I'm excited to share Empire's first ever security partner. Harpie is the best tool to prevent your wallet from theft in real time. Harpie is not just a security solution, they are a peace of mind solution. But don't just take our word for it. Harpie is the only wallet security solution that protected 100% of its users from attacks like the Ledger one in Q4, which was an off-chain signature attack. To learn more about Harpie, click the link in the show notes or visit harpie.io/empire.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Empire. I'm really excited to do this sequel to the first AI crypto pod that we did back in December. Casey, you were on it with Daniel from Modulus. People should go listen to that. It was very well received. The space has moved quite a bit. The attention in AI seems like it's all-time high. So I'm really excited to host Mo. Welcome. I think you're the co-founder of Exo Labs, doing some really interesting things. I'll pass it on to you for an intro, and then Casey, for people not familiar, living under a rock, you could also give an intro.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I guess Daniel was too busy this time, so
Not at all.
My name is Mohamed. I work on a company called Exo. Essentially, you can use edge devices like phones and laptops to run AI models locally and privately on there. I guess the two things I know about AI, I learned mostly during my studies at Oxford. I did a PhD in AI and robotics at the Oxford Robotics Institute, and I've done a few things in Web3 over the years. And now I'm working full time on Exo, like Santiago said. So great to be here.
I should say, full disclosure, I am an investor in Exo Labs, and I'm also an investor in Casey's fund Topology. So I'll try to remove my bias from this episode. I mostly will be in the background because these two folks are going to have a great conversation, but full disclosure.
I can give a quick bio too. So my name is Casey. I'm the founding GP of Topology, which is an early stage frontier tech firm. We do not just crypto, but crypto is one of our focus areas. And prior to starting Topology, I was an engineer at Google for a long time, and then most recently was an investment partner at Paradigm.
Amazing. I think I'd like to start this conversation with just a high level framework. I think it's people come to crypto and they expect like grandiose innovations, and they may be too impatient or may not be paying close attention to what's happening at the ground level, and they miss perhaps really profound but maybe subtle innovations, or also they expect many innovations, and particularly overnight. And I think there's some interesting stuff happening at this intersection of crypto and AI. You guys are probably the closest to it. So I'd like to start the conversation just maybe starting off like what you're seeing, what's really exciting, and then we can go from there.
What we're seeing is changing. I'll start there. So when we did this podcast back in December, we were seeing a lot of foundation model companies. And that was probably the most popular pitch I got was we're going to create a foundation model for crypto. And crypto is an incredible playground that's contained that we can train data on. And that was a very, very common thing. And that has died down. And what has come up is more like agents, applications, and infrastructure. And I think that's only been fortified by the fact that LLMs are being commoditized across Web 2 as well. And so the pitch around foundation models is just getting weaker and weaker by the day. But to Santiago's point, I will say that I deeply agree that there's probably 10 to 15 topics right now that are popular that I have seen maybe more than 5 pitches in each. And I would be excited if just 3 things worked. I will say right now, very little is working. I think the thing that is working the most is from a technical lens, there's some breakthroughs in local compute. So, like what Exo is doing, there's some breakthroughs potentially in distributed training in inference. But then from a product standpoint, the thing that probably has the most product market fit is just distributed uh, either computer inference, where basically you can get cheaper compute by hooking into a crowdsourced network instead of just using centralized players. And like a very concrete example of this is that you can go to brev.dev, which was recently acquired by NVIDIA. It's a just regular Web 2 company, AI company, and you can just rent Akash servers for a fraction of the cost of what you would rent them on AWS. And again, like we haven't really pressure tested totally over a long period of time how long this price arbitrage will last. AWS could easily come in and maybe say, screw it, we want to eat their lunch. So I don't want to say this is a differentiator that's forever lasting. It could be more ephemeral than we hope, but that's just like a very, I think, concrete example of where we're seeing some sense of product market fit. And then before we go on from this topic, I just want to say one thing, which is that at Topology, we're basically taking a very engineering-centric approach to this entire category or entire space. And we're looking for a technical investor. And so if you're listening to this and you're interested, DM me.
I was going to plug the chill. Well, Casey, you mentioned local training. So Mo, I think this would be a great opportunity to explain kind of what Exo is doing and a lot of the innovation that's happening there.
Yeah, just before I go there, just to comment on what you were both saying about like a lot of the hype and a lot of the stuff that's very promised and not much work yet today. Like in February, before I started working on Exo directly, like when I was looking what to work on, I just wrote this report. I just like tried to like see what's happening in the space, all the different like problems and people working on. And I think we called it like the AI Crypto Primer. It was like this like very long report. And I had a few takeaways from that. Takeaway one is I'm never writing reports again. This is like the worst thing ever. Like it's just so time consuming to write a good report. Well, good report.
Did you actually write it yourself? Or you had like an AI?
We actually like most of the substance, the first few sections were all like written and iterated on like crazy. Like it was a very brutal month to just write the report. But the second thing is like a lot of the stuff didn't quite make sense to me, and I couldn't wrap my head around it because I couldn't often pinpoint what is the problem being solved here. Like, what problem is this thing addressing? I would see a project, I'm like, oh, this looks very cool, and I'm just trying to understand like what is it actually solving, which was like quite like non-trivial to me to just be able to say, and I think that's like a general challenge in the space in general is like you have a lot of stuff that's like tech first. We have this thing that exists and it's cool, and let's try to apply it with this AI context in mind. But like it's not like, oh, here's a real problem that we're just like trying to address. And the report basically starts by like making this high level distinction about like when you think about like these two spaces, like AI and Web3. I try to use AI crypto less and say more AI Web3. It makes me feel less that it's a casino. It's more like just technology. And it's really like, if you think about intersection, it's like either using something in AI, some AI tool to solve a problem in Web3. For example, you could say a problem in Web3 is DeFi hacks. Stuff gets hacked all the time. And that's a problem in Web3. People in Web3 understand it. And I'm going to go take tools from AI, like, I don't know, reinforcement learning, whatever. I'm going to build a product that makes it less likely for stuff to get hacked. For example, like an auditing tool that is like AI powered. And that's type one. So I'm using something in AI to solve a Web3 problem. And the second thing is like I'm using something in Web3, like token incentives or maybe cryptography or something like that to solve an AI problem. Let's say, I don't actually have a specific example in mind, but let's say data labeling is a problem that's hard in this setting, and we need more data to train this model, label data, and I'm going to use incentives to get people to label that data. Whether that makes sense or not, I'm not sure, but this is an AI problem. So for someone to solve that problem, you need to understand, the AI aspect of it, and kind of like you need to go talk to AI practitioners to understand how that part works. So what we're doing at Exo is just starts with the premise of like you want to run a workload. For example, you have a model that you want to run yourself because you care about privacy. Let's say you're a law firm or a bio company or a business or anyone who cares about privacy. You want to run something and you care about privacy. So what do? You just run it on premise. Just like run it in your own hardware. And your own hardware in this case means a GPU. But what if you don't have a GPU? Well, we can just allow you to do it on edge devices. So that's kind of like just the TLDR of what we do.
Yeah. Casey, I'm curious what you think of that. Like, as you think from an investing lens, you know, how much of what is talked at, this crypto AI intersection is like crypto enhancing what is possible with AI, or AI enhancing just crypto applications and use cases, or just something completely new that is like possible at both this intersection of crypto and AI?
Yeah. Yeah. I used to use that mental framework a lot of AI meets crypto, crypto meets AI, and then net new. I've actually walked back from that mental model a little bit because I think the lines are starting to get more blurred. But I agree with you that is one popular mental model. And to answer Santiago's question, we see a lot of crypto helping AI in venture scale problems because a lot of the AI helping crypto are so profitable. And I'll give you an example of like an AI trading bot where they don't really need venture money. And even if they did need venture money, it's more of a lifestyle business. And I'm not interested in the funding those businesses because they're profitable from day one. And so that's like more of like AI ubiquitously helping crypto and like a lot of DeFi projects, which I think are great businesses. But again, I don't think they're venture scale. And so the things that we venture firms are getting a lot of is more of the latter. And then to Santiago's point, there is kind of this like new category of like what is uniquely enabled by both, and that's starting to take form, but there's not much product market fit there. But that's why maybe this is a good segue into the map. When I was thinking more of like 30,000 square foot views, how to really index the space and make sure I have a pulse on it, what I ended up deciding was that I wanted to build some software that enabled the community to manage it themselves. And so we have this, if you go to like topology.vc/DAI-map, it is a crowdsourced market map where you actually give submissions of what category specific projects live in. And then I have an agent that actually goes through and opens the Twitter link and sees how many people in my network follow them. And if it's over a threshold, then it sends it to me on Slack. And then I can decide if we add it to the map. Actually, somebody else decides if it gets added to the map on a weekly basis. But the point is that like most market maps are really static and biased and they don't scale with time. And the purpose of this map is that it actually will update continuously forever. And it hopefully gives like an overview of not what I think the categories are, but actually what people think the categories are. And if it would be helpful, I'm happy to take like a minute or two and walk through what those categories are today.
So we have the map pulled up. So Casey, continue.
Okay, great. Yeah. So starting at the bottom of the stack, the first thing we have is compute. And these are just raw processors and servers that you have access to. And then within compute, there's a handful of categories. This is where I put edge. So what Mohamed is working on, also just like aggregated GPUs at scale, which is something we've already talked about. And then on top of that, we have inference networks, which is kind of a subset of compute, but it's really focused on just inference, not training at all. And we have some image specific inference networks already in crypto. We also have LLM specific inference networks like Cusco. Uh, and then on top of that category, I have coordination layers. This is really a catch-all for things that there's just so many categories. This is more of just layers between things that don't fit within one category. So things like, let's see, what would be a good example? Like Near. Near is doing a lot in AI, and I think of it as maybe a general orchestration layer or coordination layer. On top of that, we have privacy, which I did not actually want this to be its own category, but because this is crowdsourced and I listened to the people, it's its own category now because this will come out later, but I have pretty strong views on privacy, I'll say. And then there's agents, which is a really big, promising, exciting category. So just using agentic workflows with non-deterministic models like LLMs. And then on top of that, we finally have some applications. So this is where it's like consumer and business, B2B use cases. Next to that, which really maybe should be below, but like are the actual model creation and fine tuning. So building the base models as well as doing the fine tuning on top. So people like Noose or Pond are living within this category. And then there's, I guess, the biggest category we see, and I put it at the top just because of the raw number of companies we're seeing, is data. And the idea here is that we are hitting our limit in terms of what can be publicly scraped to create these models. And because of that, there's a lot of talk around where crypto could come into play to incentivize the collection of different data sources. And this is just a known thing you can Google around. And the fact that we really are hitting this ceiling. And so there's kind of two options from here. It's either people start coordinating to create more data, or there's like, there's usually synthetic data, which is, I guess, another option. And then the third option is we're creating more data moving forward that's used. But as it goes right now, we are just like tapping out. And so crypto introduces a totally new option for how to deal with and I guess like both interact and generate this data. So that's the map as it is today. And then like I said, if you want to add to it, you basically just hit add new projects and then you can choose a category or say a new category. And then once we hit a quorum with enough requests for a new category, it gets created.
Mo, what are your thoughts when you look at this? Obviously, you're there at the very bottom in edge compute. But what's your overall reaction or thoughts when you look at the map?
Yeah, I was actually curious, like, why, Casey, why don't you think privacy should be a category? And if not, like, what is the space for things like Zama or FHE? Like, where does that fit in the stack?
Yeah, I just think that privacy is a feature, not a category. And I feel that it should be embedded in each of these. So I think there's, for example, Million is compute, and I think it's privacy centric compute. And so I think that it's just a secondary or ternary classification in the taxonomy that I would prefer. But again, I mean, people are so obviously it's so part of the ethos of this space, and people want that to be a differentiating factor. So my hands are tied.
Yeah, because I find privacy a really tricky one to think about in general. Because, well, first of all, um, retail caring about privacy is a bit of a meme. Like, very few retail users in the world actually care about privacy, and we've seen this like in like Web2, social media in particular. But like, for example, businesses care about privacy a lot, and I was just always curious, like, I guess, like, if let's say I'm a business and I care about privacy, like I'm a bio company or whatever, or what are my options? It's either like on premise or cloud plus something on it. So like, I don't know, let's say FHE. And when I personally like try to think, if I'm a business, what is the trade-off here? Like, I guess if I'm a law firm, doing stuff on premise means I have to now buy and maintain hardware, and like that's quite a hard thing. But if I'm doing FHE, I'm paying like, I don't know, 25,000x overhead, or if I want like proper privacy. So I wonder, like, what you think that space looks like, and for who it makes sense to just like, just do stuff on premise versus use some of these protocols that are like maybe doing something with MPC or FHE and these kind of technologies.
Yeah, the problem is the trade-off between price and trust.
Yeah.
Over and over again. I just hear that from businesses. Like any of my portfolio companies that have B2B customers, I like to talk to them. And they'll just tell me that, we're willing to try it, but we don't really know this company. We don't really want to trust it. And then the more they say they're decentralized, the less they're interested, because what business wants to work with a decentralized protocol? Like that just introduces a huge, more laundry list of concerns. And there are like cases where that makes sense. But I think that that's why edge compute is going to make there's the consumer case, which we can talk about, but for the business case, it's so obvious, it's so strong for them to be able to be doing these computations locally on their own machines that they trust, and they don't have the price arbitrage, or it's like the price delta. So it's a win-win because they don't have to trust anybody and they get the price benefits.
Yeah, I guess what the reason I'm asking this, like, obviously I work on edge compute, and one of the things I believe is like, oh, with EXO, these businesses who want to care about privacy, they can run stuff on premise without having to buy or maintain hardware.
Yeah.
But like, I always think about the risks. Like, am I mid curving, or does, I don't know, a huge data center in the cloud, FHE, in 5 years make much more sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody like. So I personally have stayed away from investing in homomorphic encryption for now, just because my smartest research friends say we're not there yet. And I think, in the game of venture, timing is really important. You don't need to just be right. You need to be right on the right time horizon. And that's a
Yeah.
totally different algorithm. And so do I think it's eventually going to work? Wouldn't bet against it. Do I think that's where the best capital could be deployed today? Fuck no. No. But so I don't have an answer to your question, but I think today I'll say that's not really what businesses are using out of everyone I've talked to, and they still are looking for a solution. And I just want to comment on something you said, which is that businesses really care about privacy. I don't really know if businesses care about privacy. I think they care about regulation and following the rules, and I think that there's a lot of downstream pressure from a lot of regulatory bodies, and that's good for them to follow certain protocols. And so that's kind of why it's they're not actually concerned about the privacy. They're concerned about checking the check boxes most of the time, I feel.
Yeah, from our chats, we've seen, for example, law firms, it just, well, legally I'm supposed to not reveal data, so I just, regulations. So that's why I care about privacy. The
Yeah.
only people who seem to care a lot about privacy are in the more competitive settings. For example, if you're a hedge fund, you're not allowed to use ChatGPT because there's a chance you leak something to these clouds.
Right.
And the same for bio companies. If you're using a bio model to synthesize a drug, the output is your IP. So if that gets leaked, it's really dangerous. So there are very few cases where they actually care about it because of competitive market reasons, and in the other case, it's just regulations. And but I guess that is very real demand. If someone has to comply with the regulations, that as a business is very attractive to go after.
Yeah. Well, I'll actually turn it back. I would love to know from your perspective. So yeah, I mean, I'm very familiar with what X is doing from a product standpoint, but from a usage standpoint and a customer standpoint, what are you seeing as the greatest demands for this right now?
I can tell you after when we're off the air. We haven't
Okay.
announced it yet. I can tell you this after the.
Oh, you can share the alpha in the pod. No problem.
Much alpha for now.
Okay.
Okay, I'll DM you later.
Well, I mean, candidly, Mo, when I evaluated EXO initially, it was this is really cool. Being able to run a model on the edge, with your any device, hook up an iPad, your MacBook, idle machines, whatever. Really cool. I have asked you time and time again, and during the process, was what does the actual product look like? How big of an opportunity this is, or is it just more for hobbyists? So without going into product announcements or whatnot, but I'm curious, someone like you can build so many different things, and you can get pulled in so many different directions, which is very common in this space. How do you think about killer vertical use cases that you're going after? And if you can comment on that, that'd be great.
Yeah. So on a high level, essentially what we do at Exo is we allow you to use these edge devices to run useful models. So essentially, it goes down to a trade-off of local versus cloud in some capacity. If why run stuff on your own device if you can just go in AWS and host it there. And there are some cases where that becomes relevant. So case one is what we just discussed, which is privacy. If I'm a business and I have to comply with privacy, or I'm a competitive business like a hedge fund or a bio company, I need to be private. So on-premise makes sense. It's very economic way to comply with my privacy requirements. And then in that case, the reason you might want to use EXO is you don't have to buy or maintain hardware. So instead of going to buy and maintain GPUs, which is a very hard thing to do unless you're super technical, just buy these free GPUs and run AI models on them and maintain that. And rack up servers, you can just use the existing devices you have. So let's say in the context of a hypothetical law firm, you have 50 laptops in the firm. You can just download an app, and there you go. You have an AI cluster. You can use AI models on premise, fully private. So that's one clear.
On that point, with the law firm, say, is that going to compromise my performance in other applications? How do we think about load balancing, all that kind of stuff?
These are all things we can solve in the back end, and right now there's
fairly abstracted from them. It's just download the app, and then it just kind of works.
Download the app, open it, use LLM, and then literally the only thing you would notice is with the current version of Exo that we have internally is if there are more people doing work, let's say playing games, and the M1 chips on the laptop's really busy, rendering graphics, it'll be a little bit slower. But if people are available, 2-3 of your colleagues are available, it'll be a lot faster. So essentially, I have stuff on my own device, laptop, and then the late spare compute of my colleagues who are in the same organization is being used to speed up my inference and run these large models. That's just one use case to think about here.
From a performance standpoint, it's parity.
I guess it depends what you compare it against. You can get like really high performance, like more tokens per second. It would just be like less efficient. So like you're paying more. It's like when you this thing called like tensor parallelism. When I try to like parallelize certain things, I can speed up the inference to some extent, but that comes at the cost of efficiency. I do more redundant compute. So it depends what you compare it against. If you think about compare this against a GPU, the math is very different. Depending whether you have the GPU, you have to buy it. If you have to buy the GPU, then the trade-off is like electricity cost versus buying a GPU. But if I have a GPU, the trade-off is very different. So then you have to look into like memory and stuff like that. So it comes down to unit economics at the end of the day. But like pretty much everything, well, to some extent, to some extent, most things are possible. So you can like run really large models very fast locally if you have enough compute. So that's one way to think about it. One other way to think about like why you might want to do stuff on edge is cost. Like let's say you just don't give a shit about like privacy at all. I just care about like optimizing cost. And you have spare compute available. You might be able to use that spare compute versus spending more money on more GPUs. And yeah, cost is one of those things that's like kind of interesting. I don't quite know how to think about this in the long term because like I think we're gonna be in a transient phase where people are gonna invest a lot of infrastructure and like GPUs and so on, but it might probably plateau. But still, to this day, I think OpenAI is gonna lose like $4 billion this year because like just they subsidize the inference costs and so on. So that's the other thing where you might think about the trade-off between like edge and like cloud. When you think about like whether to do stuff local or in the cloud, it just depends like what kind of use case you're in. Again, some things might be privacy, some things might be more about cost, something might be more about latency. And you have the more ideological stuff about, for example, owning your AI model. If you can just like have your AI model just locally on your device, they're private to you, and you have access to them, that is one way to like think about like democratizing access to AI. And that kind of comes in two layers. Like you have these incredible open source models that someone like Meta creates, these llama models, and they release them. And that's great for the space. But once the model is released, like llama 400, like 405B, 400 billion parameters, and fine-tuned version of that model are like comparative and in some cases better than ChatGPT in performance. So these are really good models freely available, but how do you run it? Like you can't run Llama 4OB on like a phone is like too big. And that's where, for example, EXO comes in. It just like allows you to like have access and use these models and have them available and not have to rely on like AWS or someone else to just like give you access to these models. Like kind of democratize the access to it. So if you have your phone and your laptop and maybe your family, now you guys can have your own Llama at home and you just own it. It's just your model. So these are different ways in which you can think about like where this tech could be useful. What we are doing from a business standpoint as a company, I can tell you after the call, but that's just like the higher level overview.
Over time, do you see this more, Casey, you kind of alluded to this earlier, but like more consumer focused or equally, focused on like enterprise and, B2B?
Well, one thing just quickly on Mo, I love this spectrum of latency sensitivity and how it unlocks different technologies. I think it's spot on. And I could draw it and share my screen, or I could do it in this space. But basically, it's like if your latency sensitivity is super, super high, the most promising technology is doing it as local as possible. And Cursor is a great example that every dev is using. Notion, I think, is another great example. Then if it's like middle of the road latency sensitivity, you're probably going to go with closed source, OpenAI, ChatGPT, or Claude, Sonnet, normal models that are closed source. And then if you're really latency insensitive, so things like with my DAI map, it only needs to run once a week. I really don't care when it runs. Definitely not, don't care in like 20 minutes, 10 minutes. And so I could use geographically distributed compute and drive down my cost. And that's like on the other end of the spectrum. And I think that spectrum is probably not spoken about enough when it comes to consumers making decisions of what technologies to be using.
And I think these things are going to become a lot more obvious, like stuff like latency matters once there are more apps, because you only have to think about this once it's an app, like Cursor, Notion, and so on. When we still think about like just like base infra, like these things are not quite obvious, but it makes a huge difference to the user experience in many cases. Like gaming is a great example where like a little bit of latency is really annoying when you're playing a game, and you notice it.
Yeah, it's like this. It's like if you're you have like low latency, you're doing something like EXO, Medium, you're working with OpenAI, and then over here it's like a distributed, like Akash, Cusco, Hyperbolic, all of that. But I think that, of course, there's other things that you need to consider with this, like privacy and other requirements. But I do think that is spot on as these consumer applications come to market and we're actually forced to make these trade-offs in real time. We'll see these materialize in Ossify. But then Santiago, your question about B2B and consumer, is it just...
Well, I mean, maybe more of a general question. Both of you talk to businesses. You also talk to portfolio companies or other people in the space. There's a lot that I want to unpack there. One, how much interest there is from just general businesses and people to use open, decentralized protocols, and also, how much of the AI community that has been dismissive or just not paying attention to crypto is actually inclined or interested in using some of the tech that is being built by crypto people.
I think high. But I think that actually consumer AI is severely underrated. I think that the non-deterministic... Oh, go ahead.
Well, how would you define consumer AI, I guess?
Yeah, just not enterprise use cases. You're not dealing with another business on the other end. And the reason is because basically I think AI, forget Gen AI, just AI in general has always had if you break up AI into what's production grade and what's research, a lot of it is research. And this is just like throughout my own career, I've noticed this, is that just a lot of the AI that we think is ready for production, it's not yet. And it's a highly technical field. And that's true across a lot of technical fields. And so what happens is you think something's production grade, you try to sell it, and then you realize there's the non-deterministic nature, or there's all these, false positives, and it's not ready. And so we're seeing this now with Gen AI, this similar thing where I see a lot of this is one of the biggest mistakes I see investors making, is that they're pouring money into research labs thinking that they're going to be commercialized, but they're not going to be commercialized because that technology actually isn't ready for production at all. And so the path to monetization is a lot hairier than people realize. And so to that end, consumer use cases that are willing to deal with maybe false positives, or the non-deterministic nature is actually a feature, not a bug, that stuff is really, really interesting and ready for businesses today. And I see a lot of people obviously focused on B2B because I think vertical B2B AI is also really interesting. But I just think if we're going to talk about underrated, overrated, consumer AI underrated.
Hey everyone, Jason here. Just wanted to take a quick break to talk about something exciting in the world of blockchain. The Stellar Development Foundation is hosting their 6th annual Meridian conference this October 15th through 17th in London. It's a 3-day event where the brightest minds in Web3 come together to discuss everything from tokenization to DeFi. If you're a developer, builder, policymaker, or business leader looking to make an impact in transforming global systems through blockchain, this is your chance to join the conversation. You'll get to network with the forward thinkers who are defining the future of this space. Head over to meridian.stellar.org and use the code BLOCKWORKSPOD for early bird pricing. Now let's get back to today's episode. This episode is brought to you by Polygon. Polygon Labs is developing the next generation of open source, zero knowledge tech to aggregate crypto liquidity and user bases, empowering developers to grow in a unified web of interoperable chains with the Ag layer. That was a big mouthful, so I'm going to tell you what it means in my words. There's all these things popping up, L2s and L3s, and it's chaos, right? If you are building something, you no longer have to worry about bootstrapping liquidity. You can basically just build in the Ag layer to tap into the liquidity of the Ag layer and the users of the Ag layer. You get the users, you get the liquidity. It's the Ag layer. It's hot. It's by Polygon Labs. They've got the Polygon Community Grants Program. It was launched with 1 billion tokens just for Polygon builders. Season 1, it's live right now. It features 35 million in Matic to support the next generation of Polygon builders. Join the aggregated future today by applying at polygon.technology/grants. That's polygon.technology/grants. If you talk to anyone, let them know Blockworks sent you. For a lot of Empire listeners, your crypto is not just another number on a screen. It's part of your future. I know Santi and myself feel that way. Our security sponsor of this episode, Harpie, takes this responsibility seriously and is the only wallet security tool that shields users from both on-chain threats and sneaky off-chain signature attacks. If you've ever been in that situation where you're moving quickly, you approve something on-chain, you realize that the address might be a dubious address, or you're really hoping that you could take that back, Harpie has you covered. Harpie can redirect your assets to your self-custodied vault, ensuring they remain completely under your control, safe and sound. With Harpie's always-on monitoring, you're not just detecting threats, you're actively blocking and recovering compromised assets from malicious transactions before they can even confirm on-chain. Harpie is the only wallet security solution that protected 100% of its users from attacks like the Ledger one in Q4, which was an off-chain signature attack. So if you're serious about protecting your crypto investments, it's time to make the switch. Secure your wallet for free at harpie.io/empire. That's Harpie, HARPIE.io/empire. If you want it to be even easier, just click the link in the show notes.
Well, I'm gonna pull this map again, and I'm curious if we overlay this. There's been a lot of money that's been being poured in AI and also in crypto AI startups. Some of these have raised tens, if not hundreds of millions. Collectively, maybe I'd like both of you to maybe talk about areas that are overhyped and underestimated in this map.
Okay, Mo, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm gonna try and be very
Without pissing off 99% of the people in the space. No hard feelings.
So I will say a few general ones. So in the bottom right corner, you have like verifiable compute, and there's ZKML. I think ZKML is a really interesting thing where a lot of the chat about it is scaling ZKML and like making it more efficient and reducing the overhead. I think ZKML will scale, but I think one thing that's like overhyped is like the software aspect of it. One thing that's like underhyped is the hardware aspect. I think like the biggest reasons for speed up will come from like hardware acceleration, like companies like Inganyama or Fabric Cryptography and so on. I think those will be a little bit more important for like actually scaling these things up than like the software companies. And the reason I believe that, I can go on a whole spiel, is this thing called the bitter lesson in AI from the famous blog by Richard Sutton, and we can go into that. But most breakthroughs in AI over time came from like just scale, and like hardware is like hardware optimized to some extent for these cryptographic operations. I think is going to be like a bigger driver than the software aspect. I think it's going to be like specialized hardware, generic software, like more general purpose software, not like, for example, ZK CNN prover and stuff like that. I think it's going to be a bit more general, and hardware is going to scale it up. So I think hardware is a bit underrated, and it's not underrated in terms of funding. These companies have raised like a lot of capital. I believe Fabric like announced their round recently. But they're underrated in terms of like just talking about them. They don't come up as often when you think about ZKML. The other thing, I guess, like tangent here.
Maybe make a pause there. When you think about, Casey, to your point around being too early on some of this stuff and being sort of indistinguishable from being wrong, hardware takes time. And most people tend to underestimate that. How do you think about like the time that it will take for these like hardware to be available and ready, production ready? Are we talking a year, 5 years, 10 years?
I have no idea how long the hardware will take. I guess like in AI, there's like a lot of new like hardware specific companies, like for example, chips for transformers, and those have done quite well in fairly short cycles. So there's a chance this goes well. I think like in the long run, the hardware companies are gonna like contribute more. I'm not sure if that means you should invest in it now. And this is generally like there's a very interesting category in like just crypto in general, of like, this stuff doesn't make sense, but I would invest in it. Like this stuff is gonna pump, so investing in it is a good idea, but it doesn't quite make sense. And stuff that might make sense over the long run, but it's probably not a good investment. I'm not an investor. I'm not a professional investor, so I don't think about these things often. Just what I think from a technical standpoint, what is underrated, I think hardware acceleration for like verified compute is underrated compared to software. I will say though, a lot of stuff around like verifiable compute, ZKML, I'm not sure like why we need it. A lot of the use cases are a bit shaky in my head. But it is going to scale eventually, and I think hardware is going to play a bigger role. So that's one thing I would say is like overrated, underrated.
Notice that Mo's being very conservative, just talking about underrated, not overrated, overhyped stuff.
Yeah,
Very politically correct.
yeah.
You're lucky I'm not a harder podcaster here.
I can chime in. Okay,
Casey's gonna go for the hammers. He's gonna go
No,
straight
no,
to
no,
all
no.
this shit's overhyped.
No, I already gave my overhyped, which I think is privacy generally. I'm really not interested in that as a primary value proposition. And I think that okay, let me think what's underrated. I think specific things in agents are underrated. Like I genuinely believe agents are going to use crypto infrastructure for payments in stablecoins. I just think that's what's going to happen. And it's I like to say that I'm not a psychic, I'm an investor, and I think a lot of investors try to be psychics and it messes up their returns. And so, you always need to be open-minded to where the puck is headed and be nimble enough to be there. And so I don't say that as like I have a crystal ball, but I just think from like first principles it makes a ton of sense. And so I think that infrastructure is underrated. And then I think what's overrated in agents is this like general development framework stuff, which is like we're creating a new L1 to be the home of agents. I have seen so many of those pitches. I just don't think the value proposition is concrete enough. And I think you run into a common pitfall of crypto or Web3, which is like the devs will come mentality. And then what else do I think? I think maybe one more thing that's underrated on the data side is that because I already mentioned that we're hitting this wall in terms of like the amount of data that we can publicly scrape, and that there's things like FineWeb, which is I think it's like 14 trillion tokens, which is like the cap of where we're at. Maybe it's 15. I think protocols like Vana, which like disclosure I am an investor in, but I really do think that this idea of coordinating people to pull more information and now leverage that in a way that's financialized for new models to use is underrated.
To me, that feels like the huge unlock that crypto's always better at coordination
Yeah,
and getting people to do stuff. And so if you overlay that with the data problem, like again, like in investment banking and finance, it's like you're only as good as the inputs. The model's only as good as the inputs. Like that's something that is true in finance, is true in AI. And so if you want to really do like fine tuning specialized data, if you're a law firm, if you take a
exactly.
generalized model, you need either synthetic data or uh, like reinforced with human learning. You need like if you overlay like a coordination layer with crypto, it can be really powerful. You can do it at
Yeah.
like it's like deepen, right? It's like you can do it like far more capital efficiently, and that's the area that I'm most excited about. Um, but yeah, I'm a sort of a lizard brain.
I know, I agree with you. I can mention two other, they're not on the map, but two other things that I think are underrated or underappreciated or talked about is that AI is generally commoditizing software development. And it's really hard for me to say that given my background, but I'm coming to accept it. And it really is going to be a class change of it's been the rise of the nerds in Silicon Valley for so long. And having a technical degree was your Willy Wonka golden ticket situation. And that's just not going to be the case in 10, not even 10, 5 years. And so with that, there's a lot of downstream effects of how venture will change, how innovation will change, how, yeah, like class structure in terms of who's talent, where do talent webs move and what's valuable within talent webs. And so that is like, I just think not explored enough when it comes to crypto. And then to Mo's point, which is semi-related, which is that some of these businesses that are AI meets crypto, because they're profitable so quickly, and because crypto is so overloaded with capital because of these multi-billion dollar funds, there's actually a new category, I think, that could become real, which are like micro loans or micro investments for these nearly profitable businesses where because now software development is so cheap, people around the world can make these businesses and maybe they need like $1,000 or $10,000 to get to a point where they don't need additional venture. And these larger funds obviously aren't positioned to do that because it wouldn't impact their P&L. It wouldn't make sense for them incentive wise.
Yeah. Any How do you think I mean, I guess this map is the real estate is not to scale in terms of the amount of money that's been poured in. It's just sort of like random. I Right?
Yeah. Well, Yeah.
Okay. How do you think about the evolution of this map going forward? Um, Perhaps what are some of the areas that you think perhaps new categories that might emerge, or if you were to like do a kind of morphing over time map in terms of actual attraction, actual usage, however you want to define that. I care less about capital, more so actual usage, like number of users or adoption. How would you, you know, how would you think that this map evolves over time?
Okay, two new categories. So one's on here, one isn't even on here yet because we need one more for the quorum to threshold to be hit. But it's robotics data because there's this huge thing right now with humanoids. And now people are thinking crypto could be the missing incentive, as Santiago talked about already, for getting the robotics data. And so there's a lot of companies going after that all of a sudden. It's like overnight too. And I think what I'll say is I know from a traction standpoint, the LOIs that they've been able to secure, and it's pretty impressive. Again, I'm not sure how it scales, but I will say, at least from an LOI and POC standpoint, I'm intrigued. And then the other thing is world models, which are, if people aren't familiar with that term, are basically more generalized models that know about our world and can do a variety of things from bioinformatics to chemistry all over. And Eric Schmidt famously started a company in this category. Also, like a very well-known Stanford professor, Fifi Lee, started a company in this category. And that I'm starting to see companies go after as well. So those are like two new categories. And then to quickly answer like how I expect the usage or product market fit to evolve with this, I do think some applications are going to start to have PMF. Like, the durability, I'm not sure, but I think something in consumer will obviously take off, or maybe that's not obvious, but to me, I think it is. And then I think the agentic is also going to start working. So agents probably in 2025 are going to start to work in a way that we can actually use them on a day-to-day basis.
As a normal example, be like you want an agent to do certain tasks that you want to like, and it would use stable coins because obviously you can't KYC, you can't use a bank account, but it naturally can use a stable coin to pay certain vendors to, build your website and pay and do everything in the background. And you kind of need the crypto rails for that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's more likely to be an actual ecosystem like Amazon. Like, I think Amazon is actually going to launch an agent in 2025, and it's going to be really good because they have the contained. They know their software, and so they can create guardrails for it not to go off the deep end. And so I think we're going to start to see major organizations launch like their versions of agentic flows and work maybe with crypto companies to do some like payment integration. Possible not, but I just think it could make sense. And but
Yeah.
I'm curious if
Yeah.
yeah, do you
Well,
disagree?
Mo, before I go to you on this point of guardrails, I mean, obviously we had Daniel from Modulus and verifiability being a big important aspect. How do you think about the traction that you may or may not get from these decentralized protocols because of this particular issue? Like maybe it's just a trust issue. It may or may not be true, but it's like, you know what? There's just too much, there's no one to call, and there's no like red button to stop,
Yeah,
and that
exactly.
giving people pause of like, if this shit goes haywire, I'd rather be using like OpenAI that I can call Sam and it may or may not be true. It's just more of a matter of perception that can hold back the space a bit. I mean, do you think that's real and actually a credible like threat to crypto AI, like getting any sense of adoption?
I think that's a broad stroke, but yeah, in general, do I think it's real that people trust OpenAI more than they want to admit? Yes. Yeah, I do. I think you want to say you don't trust it, but I think there we're a small set of people in this community, and I think most people do trust OpenAI, and I think they're moving in that direction to garner more trust. I also think people trust Apple. I think and I think Apple is really well positioned to actually break into this category. But I still think that there's a lot of things that we don't know how the story ends yet, especially with AI regulation. And I think that there's just like a few things that could happen over the next few years that bring decentralized AI more to the forefront. And I think there's still certain categories where even if you trust OpenAI, decentralized AI still makes sense. So I guess I want to say it's like, I think there's nuance to that answer.
Mhm.
And I think the devil is probably in the details there.
Well, one thing that is definitely like gonna change hopefully soon is like, a lot of people right now build like picks and shovels, like really like low level infra, and for some reason in general, like crypto space loves to fund infra versus just like apps. And a lot of this low level infra, I think, will be just commoditized very quickly. And because like if I'm like a successful app developer and I'm looking at like which GPU marketplace to run stuff on, it's probably at some point going to be like a very like hard calculation. Maybe I care about privacy, so I'll go for that. But if I don't, probably just cost like whatever is cheapest, and then be commoditized very quickly. So I think that's something that right now, like there's so many projects like doing GPU marketplaces, and probably this will like get commoditized, and then like it'll be the distinction will be a lot more on the app layer, with like the useful stuff there. Well, I guess people have been saying this in like general crypto for a while, but it's still like infra is still a very popular thing. The other thing that's like very interesting to think about, I guess, is a lot of things like get accelerated or decelerated a little bit based on funding. I think it's a little bit of a fallacy. In general, like more funding does not necessarily make it for you easier to find product market fit. But there's a big caveat here, which is many things in AI are closer to hardware than they are to software. Like many thing AI companies are very capital intensive. If you think about, I don't know, the foundational model companies, like you can't just be two kids in a dorm room to build Mistral. You need all the compute. So it's like a little bit more like you need this upfront capital investment and all that stuff that you don't necessarily have in like a pure software company. And but again, the foundational model is probably going to get like very good. Like Mark Zuckerberg is going to keep funding like a few of these open source ones, and then like a lot of value will accrue to the app layer. So a few things there is one thing I think about a lot is when you just like a quick like step back first. Over time, most progress in AI history came from like scaling up. There's this famous blog post that I really like to quote called "The Bitter Lesson," and basically throughout history, specialized models that were handcrafted don't perform as well, just like people who leverage scale. I have a personal experience with this where in the start of my PhD in Oxford, we had a talk and OpenAI was mentioned at the time. At the time, we still had GPT-2, so it was still trash. And I remember the lecturer was talking about OpenAI and how they're just doing this like next word prediction, very simple structure, just trying to scale it up to build these good models. And he called OpenAI retarded, and he said that we should look into like how kids learn, how humans learn language, and encode all this stuff into language models. But the thing that worked well was just like these fairly simple models, somewhat simple. They're not like handcrafted for like English language or whatever. It's like fairly general. I would just scale them up like crazy, just like more data, more compute, just bigger, better. And this is like a common trend. And the reason it's called the bitter lesson is like as a scientist, it's not very satisfying to just think, oh, skill is just going to beat my intellect of how to cleverly construct the models. But this happens over and over again. Like in
Mhm.
speech recognition, yeah, all these people tried to craft models for speech recognition, but like hidden Markov models were the best thing, just like a statistical model. Back in the 90s, you had all these chess researchers who built chess computers based on like, how humans play chess. But then like IBM came along with a fairly brute force thing and like beat everyone out. And I think in a
Wasn't
lot
there a very hallmark moment where like the model like did a move that most chess like savants were like, this doesn't make any sense, and that's how it actually beat Kasparov, I think.
I don't quite
Uh,
remember, but I think a lot of this stuff happened also like later on with the game of Go. There were a lot of these like
in
new.
Go, particularly as well, yeah, where the model
Yeah.
just created a totally new move, and experts are like, this doesn't make any sense, and then they're like, holy shit, no, it actually does, and that's how you beat the human.
And yeah, that's just changed trend in general. That most progress just came from like scaling up these models. And actually, in the case of like chess at the time, when like the best chess AI like beat Kasparov, loads of the researchers said, "Oh, this is just brute force, and this is not going to win in the long run. This is not how humans do it." But like machines are not humans, and they're very different in nature, so they can afford to just like scale up and like plug these GPUs together. So I think one general thing is you will go through these cycles where we discover some specific architecture, we scale it up, and it gets like passes everything else, and then we some point we plateau, and then a new architecture come along that allows us to scale better. So like things that allow you to scale are like historically a good bet to make. That's how like just the space is going to progress, like just by scaling things up. Over time, I just think about like how stuff evolved. I think soon someone's gonna come up with a new architecture that isn't a transformer, like some new model, some different thing, and then like a lot of funding would have to move and like go to that, but scale that up very quickly. One thing I'm very curious about is like this model called an XLSTM, like this thing like a transformer, it's like a different architecture, And if someone just like scales it up like crazy and like makes a really big version, is that going to do much better? Because these models perform much better on a smaller scale. And what that means is like some investment become quite tricky. So let's say I want to invest in like Etched, like this like hardware company that's like optimized for transformers. If you believe transformers are the future, this architecture and scaling is just better, and we need to keep scaling for a long time, then that's a pretty good bet to make because we can like just do a lot more with transformers. But like if a new architecture comes along, then you've specialized in transformers, and now it's kind of like not very useful for this other setting. So that's another thing that I think is interesting around like the hardware layer and allowed like influence the whole stack. Depending on like what the model looks like, the whole stack changes. One big change that happened over time is previously you had to train every model from scratch, but then foundational models came along. A foundational model is this big thing that you train once, and then you train small things on it, and you need a lot less data to do it. So that will change a lot how the data layer looks like, for example. The other thing is like if synthetic data somehow becomes useful, we're a bit skeptical of synthetic data in general, but historically it has worked in multiple instances. I remember like when I was taking a deep learning class in college, you had like this thing to like classify dogs and cats, like or like cat or not a cat. And then like the researchers were like, oh yeah, we're gonna augment this data. We're gonna take this exact same cat picture and like for example crop it. And then we'll take this cat picture and like give it like a different shade of color. And then you have like more fake data and that helps the model do better.
Mhm.
I always was a bit
For
confused.
listeners, that's synthetic data, right?
Yeah, that's somewhat synthetic, but now like synthetic could just literally mean like just AI generated if that works. There's like a interesting thing called model collapse, where if you train these models based on synthetic data from future models. So like I guess the idea here is a lot of people now use ChatGPT and Claude. So a lot of the content on the internet that's going to be used for the future version of them is generated by like GPT and Claude. So if you have a lot of like synthetic data and use it to train a new model, what happens? And that paper just shows like these models just degrade over time and become gibberish if you keep training on synthetic data.
Yes.
But maybe someone solves that. So here's some of the things that I think are really interesting and like the general space going forward. One thing to note is for most stuff we talked about, these are like AI problems. Like these are things to think about them productively. You have to like understand like machine learning at some depth. So like for a lot of this stuff to progress in decentralized AI, you would need also a lot of AI talent, machine learning talent to come and look at these things. And that's I guess like why I have people like Casey who like have traditional like machine learning experience is very important because these are not crypto problems, not like DeFi hacks. This is like very deep technical machine learning problems, and we're trying to like let's say for example to scale up compute, leverage all these like latent compute. That's cool, but that's not the hard bit. The hard bit is like actually on the machine learning side, and yeah, the other way around I think is a lot more interesting. Like leveraging AI in crypto is like security and like trading bots and all that stuff. That's like there you need the the DeFi expertise to enter DeFi hacks, and for that you don't need crazy AI talent. But for the other aspect, like Web3 helping AI, you need like a deep understanding of like machine learning.
Yeah. You go to an AI conference, you go talk to your colleagues in Oxford or Google, Casey, and you tell them, hey, what are the biggest problems, bottlenecks that you're facing today? And they list out top 10. You survey 100 people. Are any of those bottlenecks or problems, constraints that they have today can be unlocked by crypto?
Do you want me to ask researchers? Like if I put
Hypothetically,
engineers?
or in conversation. Yeah, like you go talk to
Yeah.
engineers and they're like, do they see value, I guess is the question, in things that
The
are unlocked by crypto?
the large the only thing that I really feel would be like consensus is that people want AI to stay open. They really believe that. They really want AI to be democratized and accessible. And that is something that Web3 and Web2 are aligned on. And I think the Web2 world sees crypto or decentralization as one contender technology to keep that future protected. Other than that, no. But that is like a big thing. And then there's all these like technical things like reducing hallucinations, scaling as Mo talked about, alternatives to transformer models that are getting, there's a few that are getting really popular. there's like a lot of technical problems that we're still overcoming, and things like mixture of experts are really popular right now. But in terms of just like large vision and ethical standpoint, it's how do we keep this technology accelerating and democratized and free and open? And maybe the Web3 community could help there. Mo, do you agree with that? You're on
You're
mute.
on mute.
It's the third time. There's definitely like a lot of like chat about these things like safety and alignment and so on. There was this really interesting quote. I'm paraphrasing here that I think George Haas tweeted. He said something along the lines of like, when Llama 400B came out, he said an aligned model, or Grok, like when Grok came out, he said an aligned model is a model that does what you tell it to do, and is not give you a moral lecture based on like the values that people who created it. Like when you go to ChatGPT and try to ask certain things, just give you like a lecture about like, I don't know, political views or whatever. And he said like an aligned model is a model that just does what you tell it to do. And these are like a lot of interesting discussions about like what does it mean for a model to be like quote unquote aligned? What does alignment actually mean? What does safety actually mean? Should you like open source stuff? And should you not open
Yeah.
source stuff? And so on. One other is interesting discussion is around how these foundational models and all these tools impact things like job markets. So there's this interesting thing about, now with Claude and like let's say with Claude, like people that aren't very technical can now, like, for example, create a game and all this stuff. So like, this enables a lot of people to come into AI. This does not necessarily like help everyone, because these AI tools like amplify the best people to like a disproportionate degree. Like normal people can now like come in and use Claude to create a game, but the really best devs are like maybe like 100x better with like a really good setup, like that's like very enhanced. So like, and you could argue then that the best thing to do in that setting is to open these models to everyone, because you don't want like the most powerful tools that make very small people like 1,000x better only available to like a very small subset of people, because that like puts them so far ahead. So like democratizing like AI and access to it and is something that's talked about a lot. And I think this kind of stuff around tools like Cursor and Claude is really interesting, because it does make like a normal dev like a lot better, maybe like 2-3x or whatever. But like, I think the really best devs like are on steroids once they have access to these AI tools. So it actually like creates more inequality in a sense. I don't have, yeah, sorry.
That will okay, so I completely agree. This is another nuance, which is that when I said software development is going to be commoditized, actually today, all it's doing is making good engineers great engineers. It's not making no engineers engineers, because you still need to understand how it all works. And so it's like everybody says, oh, it's the worst time to be an engineer. It's the best time to be an engineer because you move faster. But that will change. Like in 2 years, I think it will help people go from 0 to 1.
Yeah, and that's why it's quite important for these things to be open, so as many people as
Yeah,
possible come in and like try to go up.
Yeah.
One other interesting trend in general is around video models, and it's something particularly around my work at Exo I'm very excited about, because these like video language models are like so much bigger, and like the stuff you're sending over the internet are not like streaming text, you're streaming video now. And that is the kind of stuff where a lot of things around edge become really interesting to me. One is streaming video is really hard because there's so much data. Like if it was possible to stream video, you probably would have Netflix trying to like stream stuff to like airlines or something. Like on a plane, stuff is pre-downloaded, because like sending data over a bad Wi-Fi is like terrible. And like these like video language models could become like really powerful in the future, and it's quite important for them to be local. One interesting thing that I learned about recently is like moving data around is extremely expensive. So you have like a lot of like climate considerations there. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I think it was something like um, in 2023, like the cost of like moving data around across the world, like data transmission, was like more than the energy consumption of Spain, which reminded me of a lot of these like stats around Bitcoin. I remember like you say, oh, Bitcoin network has more energy than like Ireland. So I remember like I compared like energy transmission, data transmission cost in energy, and like the Bitcoin network, and it was more. I think it was like almost like 2x or something. Like moving data around is a very expensive thing. And that's one of the things I'm excited about for edge computing. Like doing stuff where the data is like also like a very important thing from an energy standpoint. And I think these like video models are gonna become like really useful in the future. And for that, like streaming is like really hard anyway. Streaming video over the internet is like really hard. And also like the environmental considerations there are like massive. And yeah, that's another thing that is interesting, and I've seen some people in like Web2 AI talk about like the climate considerations of like developing these like large models. but it's not very popular discourse yet. But I'm interested in that.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, this has been a fascinating discussion. I think we can keep going on and on and on. We should definitely do a follow up, and because I would suspect that this map is going to continue to grow and evolve. And it's just such a good central point to anchor the discussion around. I want to maybe end with something that I've thought a lot about, which is this centralizing force of technology. It's incredibly powerful and abundant. At the same time, it is also very centralizing and unequal, has been. How do you think AI, um, do you think AI, I guess, exponentiates that, or it does not? And does crypto play a role in the outcome?
I think that AI is, yes, a naturally centralizing force, as most technologies are. And I do think that crypto is going to play a role, or I wouldn't be here. I think that it's very promising what the fundamental principles of crypto are and how it can play into the vision of AI. But I think we just need to be very careful in how we construct the future, because I think there's also a lot of negative that crypto can bring to AI, to be honest, if we move too fast and loose.
Yeah, I think it's good that this is near the end because I'm going to say some stuff that might be better to cut out. I think, like, yes, I do agree. Is like naturally AI is naturally a centralizing force, and there is some role of decentralization that could happen and help with that. But I definitely like Casey's point just now. I think it's very important, like how this works, like the ethos of decentralizing stuff is really good, and this actually like just broader than AI. Like I assume back in 2014, when people like work on like the first version of Ethereum and so on, the ethos of crypto is like fairly admirable. But then like quickly what happens is like like a lot of malicious stuff happens in the space, a lot of scams and grifts and so on, which these things can like damage progress to some extent, and they take resources away from like good projects. And there are all types of dynamics that are very hard to like reason about, like maybe like one interesting thing is like with a lot of projects you're using something from Web3 to help solve an AI problem, but to assess if something is an AI problem or not, you need to understand that space. And if you're like, let's say, a crypto investor, there's a bit of a fog of war because you don't spend your days like looking into machine learning. So like whether this makes sense or not is not immediately obvious, so I guess you just go with the narratives. And if there's like overfunding and a lot of like people need to deploy their funds and ownership targets, you might have like a lot of capital be deployed and like stuff is just like nonsense, which like distracts resources from like the stuff that actually makes sense. Which is like not just AI crypto, but just like a general thing in the space of like and these kind of things like the deceleration, the decel, and like the grifts and stuff like that can definitely be damaging if we move too quickly. And then the other type of moving too quickly, which is like poorly designed systems, can also be very dangerous. I'm not sure if you've seen this, but something scared me last week was this guy wrote like a Twitter thread about he used Claude to create like a nuclear fusion at home, which is great. Just like open science and all this stuff. But it's also a little bit terrifying that you can like someone in a dorm room with no hardware experience like made a nuclear fusion. And he had like like the metal thing in a protein shaker that was part of the fusion. I was like, wait, and that is
Yeah.
like these kind of things can be quite dangerous. Like you don't want to put like nukes in everyone's hand. So there is an argument around safety. I'm just not sure what best to
Well,
address it.
the difference between nuclear fusion and then an actual nuke is quite large, but
Yeah, yeah,
I,
yeah.
I take your
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
No,
Also, the counter argument of that is most nuclear accidents have been human error, and so if the AI can correct that, assuming it doesn't want to destroy humanity, then it's a good thing because you would avoid Fukushima and all the other like 3 Mile and all the other nuclear accidents actually, which have been human error.
And one other argument you can make is like, a big reason why many people leaked nuclear stuff in the Cold War to Russia was like, if two people have nukes, no one's going to use it.
Right. Yeah. Deterrence. Mutually assured deterrence.
Exactly. So like the best way could just be like, to open source everything. George has like, alignment, just like it should do what it thought to do. It should be open, it should be accessible to everyone. But yeah, so like that's just like a comment in general about like how like the ideas here I think are good, but it doesn't mean we should just like go ahead and like fund everything and stuff like that. And there's like real challenges like the fog of war. If you're saying I'm going to use like incentives or like cryptography or something like that to go solve this like ML problem, like the people assessing this, if they don't know enough machine learning, is like very hard to do, and there's no like easy way out of this.
Mhm.
And again, like as an investor, you don't want to like underinvest. It's very dangerous because you might miss like kind of like early projects and so on. So there's like, a lot of nuances that could like fuel what we've seen, like in like normal crypto. Like the negative sentiment about crypto is like the public sentiment about crypto is like very negative because of all like the scams and grifts that happen over the years. If you go to SF, like you mentioned crypto, a lot of people like really turned it off immediately. And the penny has swung in the other direction too hard. Crypto is really cool, and now it's like really not cool.
Yeah.
I think on a podcast recently, Tarun from the Gauntlet was saying that he was talking to some people, and he didn't want to say that he works in like crypto. He just said, "I work in cybersecurity." It's just like
Yeah,
not a cool thing at all, and that could happen again in AI crypto in particular by just like funding like all these random things.
I think that line will blur over time. We make this distinction, AI, crypto and non-crypto. That goes away, I think. For me, my central point around AI and how it fits is I actually think that if there's a shot that we have to making it more equal and not as centralizing is with crypto. So it's AI with crypto properties attached to it that kind of like acts as a counterforce to this natural like gravitational pull to centralization. And I think it begins and ends with why I think crypto is so powerful. It's just a better coordination layer to whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's finance, whether it's deep in or in AI. It's just a better coordinate. It's a kind of novel system to coordinate. And I think it's really interesting for some of these like use cases like data labeling. I mean, I've always felt like there are data gatekeepers, and that has facilitated centralization. You think about Google, Meta, Amazon. As more data gets created and gets created on chain, and it's open, then and you can coordinate and incentivize people more cost efficiently. It You're never going to win with ideology. I think you win with practical, like ROI kind of stuff, and I think crypto can be really good at that. I don't think there's any problem with that. I think ideology is great, but if it's not backed by real, like tangible, a higher, more efficient ROI, better at parity, like we're never going to win. But actually now when you have like really opinionated models from centralized companies, if you're a developer, then maybe you would want to use an open model. Because you have to. You can't really use a model that's really opinionated and tells you not to eat red meat or something like that. It's kind of bizarre. Anyways, really fascinating discussion, both of you. I know you're incredibly busy, so thank you for coming on. We've talked about a lot of different things, blog posts and this website with a map. Casey, people can contribute. We'll link those in the show notes. But I guess any parting thoughts as we look to close the pod?
My one parting thought is that there's a dynamic in crypto where investors have made the most money on infrastructure, to Mohamed's point, and specifically L1s. And so a lot of builders are pushed to build in that category because it's where the money lies and where historical returns lie. My push for the space is just to not fall into the fallacy that the future will be replicated by historical performance, and just do the thing that you think is most technically interesting and makes the most sense from first principles instead of doing any copy pasta, because I know it can be tempting, but it's not actually what's going to lead the entire space to the place that we want it to be.
Yeah, I guess my parting thought, which is how I think about this in general, is like just try to solve a useful problem. And if it happens to use like crypto, use crypto. If it happens to the blockchain, use the blockchain. But just try to solve a problem. And like I guess like even if hypothetically you raise from some crypto investors, we end up like being a very valuable AI company. I don't think anyone's gonna mind like if you accidentally become OpenAI or something. So just try to solve a useful problem. And this is like very hard, or at least very rare to see. Like when you ask someone, what is this problem solve? What problem is this solving? For some reason, like it's not clear to the people working on it, which is like a bit dangerous. So I don't get too caught up in like AI and crypto and like all these different things. Just solve a problem and then like use
I
whatever.
love that. Yeah, parting joint words, solve problems.
Yeah, go to an AI conference and then ask people what their bottlenecks and problems are to that initial prior question, and then I think maybe in that list of problems, you'll find something that can be unlocked with AI, with crypto, or if not, just solve the problem and still
Or maybe there's a problem in crypto that would need
correct.
AI. Maybe like you should build the, like, that problem with like pump.fund discoverability. Build pump.ai, like a recommendation engine for pump.fund or something. Maybe that would be very useful. Like, or I don't know. I'm just saying stuff here. Don't actually build this. Like, just think about it.
Someone's gonna go and build it for sure.
If you do
Awesome.
build it, reach out to me.
There you go. Amazing. Well, Casey, Mo, thanks so much for coming on. I mean, I really enjoyed this discussion. It was great learning for me, and I'm sure our audience will appreciate it as well. So, yeah, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll have to do a part 3 soon.
Sounds
for having
good.
us.
Thank you, Santiago.
Thanks.
Hey everyone, big thanks for watching today's episode. Wanted to just quickly remind you about the Stellar Development Foundation's 6th annual Meridian conference this October 15th through 17th in London. This is an incredible opportunity to network with the forward thinkers who are defining the future of this space. Head over to meridian.stellar.org and use the code BLOCKWORKSPOD for early bird pricing.